first time I saw her that day, she was standing on a toilet seat in the next stall, staring at me over the divider like she'd been waiting for the exact moment I'd sit down. Her face rose into view slowly, like she was practicing it. And when she spoke, she didn't sound confused or lost. She sounded certain. "I don't want your money," she said, calm as a prayer. "I want your baby." This happened in 2019 when I was 7 months pregnant. My name is Jenna, and at the time I was living with my Aunt Marisol in a quiet neighborhood outside Greenville, South Carolina. I was 27, broke, embarrassed that I needed help, and trying to keep my life steady long enough to bring my daughter into it without falling apart. Marisol was the only person in my family who didn't treat me like a mistake that had to be managed. She helped with rent, rides, groceries, everything. But more than that, she helped in the way that matters when you're pregnant and scared. She made the world feel less sharp. She watched me like a hawk, too. If I reached for something heavy, she took it. If I tried carrying too many bags, she removed them from my arms like she was disarming a bomb. That morning, though, she woke up sick. At 10:12 a.m., I heard her coughing hard in her room. When I opened the door, she was under 2 blankets, sweating, eyes glassy. "I think it's a fever," she said. "I'm fine, just not moving." I stood there with that mix of worry and guilt you get when someone has been doing everything for you, and now they can't. "Do you need anything?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "Just rest, and don't go running around." That should have been the end of it, but pregnancy cravings don't care what's reasonable. Around 12:03 p.m., I got hit with that sharp, specific urge that feels like a need. Salty chips, fruit gummies, and a certain juice I'd been obsessed with for weeks. I tried to ignore it. Water, crackers. I even sat in the kitchen and stared at the fridge like that would solve anything. Nothing worked. Marisol was sick, and I didn't want to keep asking her for things when she could barely sit up, so I told myself it was a simple trip. The discount store was close. 5 minutes. When I told her I was going, she frowned like she was my mother and I was 12. "Jenna," she said, "just wait. I'll go later." "You can't even stand," I replied. "I'll be fast. It's literally 5 minutes." Marisol stared at me like she was deciding whether to argue or trust me. Then she sighed and said, "Lock the door behind you and don't talk to anyone weird." I laughed because it sounded dramatic. "I'm pregnant," I said. "Not famous." She didn't laugh back. At 12:24 p.m., I left the house, locked the door, and took her car. The store was called Value Harbor, one of those discount places that sells everything from dish soap to cheap snacks. It was a few blocks away in a small strip with a nail salon and a pawn shop. It was one of those cold, bright days where the sun looks warm, but isn't. The parking lot had old salt stains and little piles of dirty snow pushed near the curbs. I parked and walked in, feeling weirdly proud of myself for doing a normal errand like a normal adult. Inside, the store was quiet. Not empty, just quiet. A few people scattered, moving slow, like they were killing time. I grabbed a cart and started down the aisles, scanning for the exact things my brain had decided it needed. At 12:37 p.m., I reached the snack aisle. I saw the chips I wanted immediately, top shelf, shoved all the way to the back like someone tall had put them there and never thought about anyone else. I stretched and reached. Nothing. I tried again, on my toes. Still nothing. My belly made it hard to lean forward, and the cart kept sliding slightly on the smooth floor. It was frustrating in a way that made me feel ridiculous, like I wasn't helpless. But in that moment, I was being reminded that I wasn't fully in control either. That's when a voice spoke behind me. "Let me help you, sweetheart." I turned and saw an older woman standing close, too close for a stranger, Late 60s, maybe. Small, neat, long brown coat even though it wasn't that cold. Gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it made her forehead look stretched. Her smile was soft and practiced, the kind that makes you automatically smile back before you decide if you want to. Before I could answer, she reached up and pulled the chips down like it was effortless. "Here you go," she said, placing them into my hands like she was handing me something precious. Relief made me polite. "Thank you," I said. Then she did something that made my skin tighten. She touched my face. Not a quick tap, a slow stroke across my cheek, like I was her granddaughter. I froze. I laughed awkwardly, the fake little sound you make when you don't know what else to do. Her eyes moved over me, my belly, my hands, my coat, like she was taking inventory. "Where's your husband?" she asked. The question was too personal, too fast. "I don't have one," I said, trying to keep it casual. Her smile didn't fade, but it changed, sharper, like she'd found a crack in something. "Oh," she said softly. "Then the father?" "He's not involved," I replied. "I see," she said. Her eyes flicked around the aisle like she was checking who could hear us. "And you're here alone?" "My aunt usually comes with me," I said. "She's sick today." The woman's eyebrows pulled together like she was offended on my behalf. "You shouldn't be out alone in your condition," she said. "I'm fine," I replied, and I started to push my cart forward, hoping movement would end the conversation. But she moved with me, not trailing behind, walking beside me, matching my pace, like my cart had a string tied to her. "How long have you been living with your aunt?" she asked. "A couple months," I said, and regretted it immediately. "And your parents?" she asked. "Not really around," I answered. She clicked her tongue like she disapproved of my whole life. The weird part wasn't only the questions, it was the way she watched, barely blinking. Her eyes kept darting, over my belly, over my cart, down the aisle, toward the front of the store. It didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like assessment. I tried to lose her by turning into a different aisle. She followed. I picked up juice and gummies, pretending to compare labels I didn't care about. She leaned in and said with a quiet laugh, "Cravings." I forced a smile. Then she said, "If I were your aunt, I'd take better care of you." That annoyed me in a way that cut through the fear. Marisol was sick in bed, still worrying about me, and this stranger was insulting her like she knew anything. "She takes great care of me," I said, firm. The woman's smile widened. "But you're here alone," she said, "and that proves she doesn't." My chest tightened. I stopped responding. I turned into the next aisle and pretended to be deeply interested in cleaning supplies. She stayed right next to me. Then casually, like she was asking about the weather, she said, "Why don't you come with me?" I stared at her. "What?" "I could take care of you," she continued, still smiling. "You and the baby. I have a big home outside town, quiet, safe. You'd be comfortable." My stomach tightened so hard it almost felt like nausea. I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because my brain didn't have a script for this. "I need to go home," I said, and I started pushing my cart away. She reached out and grabbed the front of my cart, stopping it. Not hard, but enough. "Okay," she said sweetly. "We'll go to your place first. You can pack your things. I'll take you back with me." The way she said it was the worst part, not like a suggestion, like a plan she'd already decided. I yanked my cart backward. "Please don't touch my cart," I snapped. Her face went blank for half a second. Then the smile returned, colder. "I'm not going with you," I said, voice shaking now. "I live with my aunt. I'm fine. Leave me alone." The woman stared at me like she was deciding what version of herself to show. Then she lowered her chin and said, in a quiet voice that made my skin prickle, But what if something happens to you? I blinked. What? She leaned closer. Your aunt isn't with you now. Life is uncertain. My throat went tight. Stay away from me, I said louder than I meant to. I'll call the police. Her eyes flickered at the word police, like it amused her. Then she stepped back, and just like that, she walked away down the aisle and disappeared between shelves. I stood there frozen, heart pounding, trying to convince myself that was it. I checked 2 aisles. Nothing. I finished shopping fast, hands shaking, and went straight to checkout. At 1:09 p.m., I paid and kept my head down. A young employee noticed my heavy bag and offered to carry it. Thank you, I said, grateful for the normalness of it. He walked me to my car, set the bag in the back seat, and said, "Have a good day." I wanted to tell him what happened, but how do you say, "An old lady just tried to recruit me like I'm a stray animal"? I watched him go back inside, and suddenly I was alone in the parking lot again. All I wanted was to leave, but pregnancy doesn't care about fear. The moment I got into the driver's seat, my body hit me with an urgent need to pee. Immediate, non-negotiable. I stared at the store entrance and thought, I can't go back in there. What if she's still inside? On the far side of the parking lot was a small standalone restroom building, a concrete box with 3 stalls. I told myself that was safer than going back into the store. At 1:14 p.m., I locked the car and walked fast across the lot, scanning windows and parked cars. The restroom was empty. At least it looked that way. I went into the first stall, sat down and tried to breathe. For about 10 seconds, everything was silent. Then the restroom door creaked open. Slow. Footsteps entered, measured, unhurried. I told myself it was just another customer. Then the footsteps stopped. Right outside the stalls, no flush, no sink, no movement, just stillness, like someone had paused to listen. My hands started sweating. I stared at the stall door, holding my breath. Then I heard breathing, heavy and close, above me. It was coming from the stall next to mine, and when I lifted my eyes, I saw it, the top edge of the divider, and a face rising into view. The same old woman, standing on the toilet seat, peering over like a child spying, except her expression wasn't playful. Her eyes were wide and empty. No smile, no warmth, just a kind of hunger that didn't belong on a human face. My throat locked so hard I couldn't scream at first. She spoke quietly, almost tender. "You need to come with me," she said. "Please," I managed, voice thin. "Leave me alone." Her mouth twitched. "I can take care of you." "I'll give you money," I blurted out. Just go away." Her face hardened like I'd insulted her. "I don't want your money," she said, and her voice dropped into something flat and final. "I want your baby." My blood turned cold. She reached one hand over the divider, fingers stretching, searching, like she expected me to hand something over. I shoved my stall door open so hard it banged the wall. I stumbled out, half screaming, and ran. She dropped down from the toilet seat and came after me. I heard her shoes slap the tile. I heard her laugh, high and excited, like this was fun. "Come here," she called, voice echoing. "I'll take care of you, too." I burst out of the restroom into daylight and ran for my car like it was the only thing keeping me alive. My belly bounced painfully with each step. I fumbled for the keys. My hands were shaking so hard the key wouldn't line up. I got the driver's door open and threw myself inside. As I slammed the door, her hand shot forward and caught the edge. I slammed again, harder. She screamed and jerked back. I didn't look at what happened. I didn't check. I just turned the key and drove. Tires squealed on salt-stained pavement. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing in the lot, one arm held close, staring at my car like she was memorizing it. And then she mouthed words at me, slow and clear, through the windshield. I couldn't hear them, but I understood the message anyway. This wasn't over. At 1:26 p.m., I pulled into our driveway, shaking so hard I could barely park straight. The moment I walked inside, Marisol sat up in bed like she'd been waiting for my footsteps. "What happened?" she demanded. I broke down. The words came out messy. Store, lady, questions, restroom, baby. Marisol's face changed as she listened. Not fear, anger, protective, real anger. She grabbed her phone and called the police immediately. An officer came later, took my statement, asked for descriptions, age, height, hair, coat, everything. They drove to Value Harbor, they checked the restroom, they checked cameras. They found nothing that mattered. No clear shot of the woman near me. No clean angle that proved she followed me. Only one detail stuck in my head. The officer said the restroom camera facing the doorway had glitched during the time window I gave. Convenient. That night, Marisol didn't sleep. She sat on the couch with the TV on and her phone in her hand like a weapon. The police told us they'd keep an eye out. They asked if the woman could have been confused. Dementia, mental illness, harmless. But harmless people don't stand on a toilet and say, "I want your baby." After midnight, the house felt smaller. Not haunted, just vulnerable. Marisol tried to act normal, but she kept checking the front window, the back door, the locks, like she didn't trust memory. I stayed on the couch with my hands wrapped around a mug of water I wasn't drinking. Every time I blinked, I saw that face over the divider. Around 10:05 p.m., Marisol said, "You're sleeping in my room tonight." "I'm fine," I lied. She pointed at me like a prosecutor. "No, you're not. You're not leaving my sight." We set the bedroom like we were bracing for a storm. Phones charged, lights on low, keys on the nightstand. Marisol locked the front door, deadbolt, and chain latch. At 11:47 p.m., I heard the first sound. Not a knock. A soft scrape, metal on metal, coming from the front of the house. I sat up instantly. Marisol's eyes snapped open too. We looked at each other in the dark. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Marisol slid out of bed, dizzy but focused, and crossed toward the window that faced the porch. She pulled the curtain back a fraction. Her face tightened. "What?" I whispered, already nauseous. "Someone's on the porch," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. I stayed back from the glass, angled my view. The porch light was on, and in that light I could see a shape close to the front door, shoulder turned, head down, hands near the lock. Not a neighbor, not someone lost, someone working. Then I heard it again, that careful scrape, like a key, like a thin tool testing a lock. Marisol reached for her phone. "I'm calling 911, she said, loud enough for the porch to hear. The scraping stopped. Silence, thick, listening silence. Then the front door handle moved. Not a hard yank, a careful test. It didn't open. The handle released. Then it moved again. Slower this time, like they were listening for the difference between locked and someone just grabbed the other side. My throat locked up. Marisol spoke into the phone the moment the dispatcher answered. "Someone is trying to get into my house," she said. "Right now." She gave our address. The dispatcher asked if we could see them. Marisol pulled the curtain a fraction again. "I can see a person on my porch," she said. "They were messing with the lock." As she said it, the porch light blinked once. Then it went dark, not flickering like a dying bulb, just cut. That was the moment my fear turned clean and sharp. Because if you're trying to break into a house, you don't want to be lit up. Marisol's voice went flat. "I see you," she said, toward the door. Then she grabbed her car keys and hit the panic button. The alarm erupted outside, loud, chaotic, echoing through the neighborhood. For a second, the porch lit up in quick flashes from the car lights, and in those flashes I saw movement. A figure stepping back from the door, then turning, then walking fast, not running, down the steps and into the darkness. A few seconds later, we heard a car door close, a vehicle start. Marisol and I moved to the other window that faced the street, staying back from the glass. Across the street, under a weak street light, a dark car sat with its lights off. Then the headlights snapped on. The car pulled away slowly, like whoever was driving didn't want to look like they were fleeing. But the timing was perfect, too perfect. The police arrived at 12:06 a.m. 2 officers walked up to the porch with flashlights and calm voices. They checked the front door first. One officer ran his light over the lock, then the edge of the door frame. He leaned in close. "There are fresh marks," he said. Marisol asked, tight, "What kind of marks?" "Like someone tried the lock with a tool," he replied. I stepped close enough to see. Tiny scratches around the keyhole, new bright lines against darker metal. The officer also swept his flashlight across the porch floor. "Footprints," he said. "Not full prints, partial wet marks, like someone stood there in damp shoes and shifted their weight." He photographed them. He asked if we had cameras. We didn't. Our neighborhood was quiet, old school, porch swings, not doorbells that record. One officer asked me if I thought it was the woman from the store. I wanted to say yes, but I couldn't prove it. All I could say was the truth. "I don't know," I whispered, "but someone was watching me today." Before they left, an officer gave Marisol a report number and told her to replace the porch light in the morning and add a motion sensor if possible. Then he looked at me, my belly, my shaking hands, and said softly, "If you see her again, don't engage. Get to people. Call immediately." After they left, Marisol locked the door again, even though it was already locked. Then she leaned her forehead against the wood for a second, like she was holding herself together. And in that moment, I understood something I didn't want to understand. This wasn't only a weird woman in a restroom. Someone tried our door like they expected it to open. The next morning, the house smelled like disinfectant and cold air. Marisol replaced the porch bulb before noon, even though she was still sick. She didn't trust the dark anymore. I stayed inside, watching through the living room window, keeping my face back from the glass. Around 12:09 p.m., and there was a knock. Not a normal knock. 2 light taps. A pause. 2 light taps again. Marisol and I froze. She didn't walk to the door. She raised her voice toward it. "If that's you, leave. We're calling the police." No reply. We listened. Footsteps on the porch. Slow. Controlled. Then a soft sound like paper touching concrete. Then the steps moved away. Silence. Marisol waited a full minute before she cracked the curtain and looked out. "No one," she whispered. She grabbed her phone and told me to stand behind her. Then she opened the door just enough to reach down and pull something inside. A single envelope, plain white, no stamp, no return address. My name printed on the front in block letters. Jenna. My stomach turned. Marisol shut the door, locked it, and placed the envelope on the kitchen table like it was evidence. She didn't sit down. Neither did I. I opened it slowly. Inside was a folded sheet of printer paper. One sentence, centered, in plain black ink. "Today was close." That was it. No signature. No explanation. Just a message that wasn't meant to be read like words. It was meant to be felt. My hand started shaking, because close only meant one thing. Someone was outside this house again, and they weren't guessing. Marisol took the paper from me, flipped it over, and her face tightened. On the back was another line, smaller, like an afterthought. Next time, open the door. Marisol didn't curse. She didn't cry. She stared at it for a long time and then said very calmly, "We're leaving. Now." And for the first time since the store, I didn't argue, because that note didn't feel like a threat about the future. It felt like a reminder about last night, like whoever wrote it knew exactly how hard our locks held. Marisol called the officer again and told him about the note. She didn't even try to sound reasonable. She sounded like a woman protecting her family. The officer came later and photographed the envelope, the paper, the handwriting. He asked if we recognized it. We didn't. He asked if we had enemies, exes, anyone unstable in our orbit. We didn't. He tried to soften it with procedure, patrols, be vigilant. Maybe it was a prank, but there was nothing playful about a lock being scratched at midnight and a note showing up the next day saying, "Today was close." Marisol packed a bag for me like we were evacuating a hurricane. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched her move, because my brain felt like a jar full of bees. We went to stay with my cousin for a few days. Marisol installed motion lights and changed the locks while we were gone. For a little while, the world got quiet again. And quiet is dangerous, because it makes you start doubting yourself. You start thinking, maybe she was just mentally ill. Maybe the porch thing was random. Maybe the note was a prank. Then, a week later, I saw the post. It was shared in a local community group, one of those be on the lookout messages with a grainy photo and too many comments. A pregnant woman in her late 20s had gone missing after a midday shopping trip at a discount store in the next town over. Different store name, same type of place, same kind of parking lot. The post said her car was found in the lot, doors unlocked, keys inside. No sign of a struggle, just gone. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred, because I could picture it too clearly. A quiet aisle, a friendly smile that turns into a plan, a restroom where nobody hears you yell. I printed the post and gave it to the officer who took my report. He looked at it, nodded slowly, and said, "We'll add it to the file." But nothing ever came of it. No arrest, no update, no closure. I gave birth 2 months later. Marisol didn't let me take the baby anywhere alone for a long time, and I stopped answering personal questions in public, no matter how harmless the person smiling looks, because sometimes the scariest people don't look scary at all. Sometimes they look like somebody's grandmother, and sometimes they don't want your money. Sometimes they want what you can't replace.